Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today during Dying Matters Awareness Week. I am honoured to welcome you to today's PCPLD webinar. This webinar is an event part of the PCPLD's award-winning webinar series. There are other recorded webinars for you to watch for free through the PCPLD website, and this one will be added to that collection as well. So a little bit more about this event. It is titled, How Can We Involve People with Profound Learning Disabilities in End-of-Life Care Planning? It will be chaired by myself, Sarah Swindells. I work for Dimensions, but today we'll be representing the PCPLD as well as the Victoria and Stuart Project. And I will be delighted in a moment to introduce you to Irene Tuffrey-Wijne, who I'm sure you're much more familiar with in chairing these webinars, and I'm really glad that Irene is able to join us today. Jean and Norman Wilson will also be joining us today to share the life of their daughter Victoria. And we hope that at the end you'll have an idea on how we can listen to people without words, so that they are at the centre of decision making. You will learn about Victoria Willson's story from her mother and others from her team, and you'll have a chance at the end to ask questions to both Jean, Norman, as well as Katrina Sullivan, the palliative care nurse, all live with us today taking your questions. There is a Q&A box in order to be part of the discussion. You'll need to use the Q&A feature, and we welcome questions posed for either Victoria's family or the palliative care team. As someone watching this webinar, you cannot speak live, but please do use the Q&A and we will try and answer as many questions live as we can. So this webinar is in collaboration with Kingston University and will launch the Victoria and Stuart Project, a 2-year funded study into end-of-life care planning. I just want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube and on the PCPLD network website, www.pcpld.org. And we will also be able to download a certificate of attendance from the website as well. If you are on Twitter, please do join the conversation, #PCPLD. But without further ado, I will now hand over to Irene to introduce Victoria's story.
Thank you, Sarah, and very nice to see you all. I'm Professor Irene Tuffrey-Wijne. I work at Kingston and St George's University of London as a Professor of Palliative Care and Intellectual Disability. Let me tell you about Victoria. Victoria Willson died in 2013, and I first met her mother, Jean, a few years before that. Jean had come to our PCPLD network annual conference, and she told me about her daughter and how Victoria's kidneys were failing and how the doctors had said that she would slowly get worse and then she would die of this. And Victoria had profound and multiple disabilities. So she asked me, Jean, what advice did we have? And I said, well, really the best advice I can give you is to get the palliative care team involved as early as possible. And I thought no more about that until a few years later, Jean nominated Victoria's team for the Linda Mackin Award, which is an award we give at the PCPLD network to celebrate excellence in end-of-life care for people with a learning disability. So that meant that Victoria had died. And we, the judges, were moved to tears by reading that nomination. And I wouldn't be surprised if you are too moved to tears when you listen to Jean in a moment. Victoria's team were given that award in 2014. And since then, Jean had not only joined the PCPLD network advisory group, but she's also worked very hard to share Victoria's story and the learning from her life and her dying. And Victoria is the inspiration behind a new study that we're just starting and launching today. We called it the Victoria and Stuart Project, so it's named after Victoria. And we'll tell a little bit more about that later on. And that's about involving people with learning disabilities in end-of-life care planning. But what we'll share with you, first of all, is a video of Jean telling Victoria's story about her life and her dying. And Jean and I recorded these conversations on 2 previous occasions, and it's about half an hour long. And after that, as Sarah said, we'll have discussions with Jean more about that. Hopefully, Kat, the palliative care nurse, is also able to join us. Unfortunately, her learning disability team leader can't make it today. She was going to come, but she can't come. But anyway, we'll have a discussion later on. So do use, as Sarah said, do use the Q&A box for your questions and comments. We will be monitoring those and we'll be able to pick those up. So, but first of all, let us now just watch Victoria's story and listen to Jean telling that story.
So Victoria lived with Lisa, her flatmate, and it was a 24-hour team, 2 teams of people for both women. Each woman had a separate team, 1-to-1 during the day. Often Victoria needed 2-to-1 because the level of her disabilities were so complex. So, for example, she was a full-time wheelchair user, but as her kidneys began to fail more and more, handling her, she needed 2 people to be safe and to be comfortable for her. So this was over a 24-hour period. It helped because I lived literally 13 minutes walk away. So I was in and out all the time and saw myself as part of the team. They saw definitely me as part of the team. Centre 404, it's the service provider, they employ the staff that works in Victoria's house. And we, over the years, we've worked up a very cohesive and strong way of working where family carers, circle of support are seen as part of that team, all supporting Victoria. We don't recruit people who are trained. We like a broad canvas. We train them up on the job. And we look for people who actively listen, who come to us with an open mind and readily say, I don't know about this. And we tell them, you know, this is how we do things. And but it's people who've got the right attitude and the ability to listen and learn and really look at Victoria as the main focus. Everything else is secondary. She's the prime focus. And not everybody can do that with somebody with Victoria's complex disabilities, illnesses, certainly her behaviour, which can challenge the socks off anybody. Throughout her life, although she was a woman without words, she knew what she wanted from life. It was up to us to interpret and then give her what she wanted. And I guess she was a bit like me, an actress really, who wanted to say things. So when she saw a camera, you know, that was showtime. And I believe in also sharing our lives. And early on, I learnt to do that. So right from, I think she was 6 months old when we made a Save a Baby campaign, because she was born with a rare condition called tuberous sclerosis. and it was important to me anyway that people should understand this condition. So we went on to make many other films. We did campaigns together because we wanted to change the system. So, for example, we did changing places, about getting toilets for people who use wheelchairs. She led the campaign for Treat Me Right, where people were dying unnecessarily in hospital because, you know, she'd been at the sharp end of prejudice and discrimination in the National Health Service. So we did it together. We made a blinding team. Victoria had a condition. She was born with tuberous sclerosis, which is genetic, it's passed on, and it's tumours that can form in any part of the body. So for Victoria, she had it in her brain, and then tumours grew in her kidneys, which ultimately was going to result in her death. The tumours became so many, and because she was so fragile at this point, dialysis and a transplant was not viable. And also we decided, her family and her circle of friends decided, why put her through all this just for a few years? So we decided that she would die over a period of time. That was a huge decision for us to make. So we knew she was going to die, we just didn't know when. So it took about 3 years, I think, of slowly losing things. But we never knew when. And Victoria would always surprise the world. She would, you know, the palliative team used to say to me, this is the last few days, and she would come up. You know, that happened 4 or 5 times. But then finally, and we all knew she was near the end. And it took about a week. But she died surrounded by people who loved her. She died in her own home. We were determined that she wouldn't be carted off to hospital where there would be no dignity and certainly no control. We wanted a peaceful, dignified death for a much-loved woman. And she died very peacefully at home, age 43, with her family and staff around her. In the event, it took about 3 years of slowly fading. So we were well prepared. And we had a plan in our heads, and then we had to share it with other people to make sure that it worked. And it did work. We knew that we had to take these team of support workers on board. So we initially, I spoke very carefully with the team leader. And it was then that we got the palliative care team involved. So the team leader and myself initially met them, and then we worked through the plans of how literally she was going to die. The thing that was uppermost in my mind was, or the family's mind, was that she would die in her own bed, in her own home, not in hospital. And we knew we needed some help in making that official. And we knew we needed some help in getting the support workers to understand our reasons and to actually implement it. We did this through a series of meetings with the palliative team, sometimes enabling it, sometimes just us and the team leader. And we explained, and her circle of friends also explained, that if Victoria could speak and tell us what she wanted, because after all, we're the ones who knew what was in her heart, really, that she would want to die at home. Having made that decision, we were talking to young women, mostly young women, 19, 20-year-olds, who'd never experienced death. And initially there was tension because they wanted the best for Victoria, and they thought, saving her life at all costs was the thing. And we were able to explain, and very honestly and sometimes very bluntly, that this is not what Victoria would want, and it's certainly not what the family would want. And some support workers, if they had a religious or cultural background, couldn't deal with that. They really felt that this was something that they couldn't deal with. So they were given the option of moving to another house and working to other people, because we made it very clear we wanted people 100% with us. And we didn't think when they moved off, I wouldn't say pleased, but that was their decision, and we had to go with that. And it was better for them. It was certainly better for Victoria. I think if there's family and they're aware of all this like we were, they should be guided by the family, but they should join together to actually make it happen. And they should have some, an acute care plan will enable that to happen, because you go through all the stages. And also by that time you will think, well, the end is going to be coming. So for us, it was important to start thinking about the funeral. And by talking about that, opens up a lot of conversations. I mean, all we did all the time was, I focused on the team leader because she would influence the rest of her team. And we're talking about a team of 15 people. Quite a lot of people. Mm. And then there was all the other fringe people, like the GP and the palliative nurse and various other and district nurses coming in. So they all had to be made aware of what our plans were, and to actually sign up and sort of promise to follow the plan. Because you have to remember, as well as the family going through turmoil and sadness, this young staff group who are never used to, maybe never experienced a death ever, are also torn, and what are they doing with their emotions, and who's supporting them? Wasn't my job. I never saw it as my job. We would talk about the practicalities, but for the emotional support, it was their team leader. And then they got support from our psychologists, from our learning disabilities team, because it was a tough job. And you'd got another tenant in another room who could also, at any one time, they'd be supporting two women living, under extreme circumstances. I think we were recognising that slowly her life was being more restricted. So Victoria loved to be out and about in her wheelchair outside, but then she got too frail to put her in her wheelchair. She got too thin to actually sit in her wheelchair. It actually hurt her. So most of her life shrunk. It shrunk from outside to inside, to the living room, and then to her bedroom over a period of time. So we had to be inventive and think about, well, the world's got to come to her. When we were talking about this is going to happen, it's inevitable, we have to think of Lisa, who shares her house with Victoria. This mustn't be a sad house. You know, I don't want black on the door before she's even gone. So we set up a pattern of things like, we used to have themed teas and anything that would, you know, the house was quite often full of people, my friends, Lisa's family, my family, and we'd have tea parties and just be jolly, because it was important for Victoria to raise her spirits and for Lisa, who was watching. And also I think it helped the staff morale, because whilst they were busy trying to think of silly things to do with Victoria, you know, one afternoon we had a Hawaiian tea party, and I went down there, they're all in grass skirts, and somebody'd got a guitar playing and they were doing all the hula dance, and we had fruit kebabs and rum punch, and you know, it was a fun afternoon. And my friends couldn't believe the atmosphere in the house. That the week she was dying, you know, we had friends to come and say goodbye to her, and although they might have cried outside, they certainly didn't inside. They just made it a very positive, and we made it very positive, and we made it very positive for the staff. You know, we sat and we talked a lot as the staff team, and particularly the team leader. And this is what we did, and they brought all sorts of things to her life.
And how much do you think Victoria realised or understood that she was fading and that she was dying?
It's difficult to say really, because although she was never able to explain anything to me as her mum, I used to tell her everything that was happening, and I used to say to her, "Lovey, you can go whenever you want, you know, just when you're ready, you can just close your eyes and just go." See, they pick up, even maybe she didn't understand, but they can pick up from your body language and your, almost what's in your heart. Victoria could pick up what I was feeling. She could pick up what her staff were feeling, because if you came in with a bad hangover or were fed up that day, that's what you got back from Victoria. Because I used to say to them, leave all that at the front door. When you step over, 100% please. Because if you're ratty, that's what you're going to get back, because she'll pick up your reactions. And people with profound disabilities do. She stopped eating. It was a battle to get her any food into her for about a year. And then about a month, she really didn't want to eat. So I think, I don't know whether she knew in her heart, just stop this. And the palliative team told us in those last 48 hours, don't give her anything, because it will make her even more uncomfortable. But when I look back now, I think that was her way of saying, well, it's enough, I'm going to go. I don't know, who can say? I think she coped with great difficulty. When your kidneys fail, all sorts of things happen to you. You get nauseous, you itch, you're just generally uncomfortable. Even just to wash somebody or to turn them is quite painful. And Victoria always had a strong spirit. And I think 2 years in, I was talking to her, because I used to see her every day during this period. I just used to sit and hold her hand. People held her hand a lot, just stroking her hand. And I said to her, you can go whenever you want, lovey. Just go. This is no good, is it? This life. And I don't know whether she ever understood me, but I'd done it with my own family, so I didn't see that any reason why I shouldn't say this and mean it to my daughter. But Victoria was always, she'd always do things in her own time, and I think she chose her moment and timing of when to go and how to go. But those last years weren't easy for her. Well, she'd had a restless night. I'd been with her all day, and she'd had a restless night, and the member of staff on had never seen anybody die, and she told me she was really, really nervous, because I said, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in the early hours. Norman and Tara had gone home to get some sleep, and at about 2:15, I was just in the kitchen making yet another cup of coffee, and she came and she said she's making funny noises, and I came back in, and the whole bedroom was full of light. The bathroom door was open, and I said, no, we must turn everything off. We just left her fairy lights on, and I found this music that really used to make her relax, and it's called Namaste. It's monks singing and bells and stuff, very peaceful. And I put some of her favourite lemon joss stick things, and I said to Emma, she's going to go soon, and she said, I can't. I said, just calm down, she's going to go. Just hold her hand, tell her you're here. And then her breath changed. I said, she's gone, Emma, she's gone. And I just held her in my arms for a bit and sent Emma out to make me another cup of tea and to go and call Norman and Tara. And it was very peaceful, and she looked beautiful. All the pain lines had gone, and her skin had become pink again. It wasn't yellow. And I'm not sure whether she had a smile, but she looked relaxed. She looked so relaxed. And then her sister came, more tears, and then her dad. And then I said, and now we're going to give her the final gift that we can give her. We're going to wash her and dress her in the clothes that we think would be good. And Emma and her sister were so shocked. They said, oh, we can't. I said, yes, you can. It's the last gift we can give her. We'll change the bedding and we'll make her look beautiful. And they were so pleased that they did that in the end, because... And the other extraordinary thing was Emma... Victoria was incontinent, so she went to get the pads, and I said, no, for once in her life, she'll just have these pretty knickers. I'd bought this pretty underwear for her, and we had special clothes that me and Tara had chosen. And because she was a colourful woman, so she went out in her pinks and reds, so that was good. It was a good thing to do. She was uncontrollable, Emma, when she came to get me. She was shaking. And she told me she'd never experienced death, and she was frightened of it. And I said, there's nothing to be frightened of. There's nothing to be frightened of. It's part of life. And I need you calm. I need you to be calm, because Victoria needs you to be calm. And that sort of rallied her, really. I think had I had a choice, I wouldn't have chosen Emma, you see. I would have had Ruby, who was the night staff. But that was, Ruby couldn't work 7 nights a week. She wasn't allowed to. But she asked me if she could, and I said, no, Ruby, I probably need you for next week when it's going to get even worse. Because this could have gone on for weeks. The palliative team said she could go on like this for weeks. But in the end, it was only 1 week. So that one night when Ruby wasn't there, Emma was there. And she hadn't experienced it before. But I think that's, in all probability, that's going to happen.
It is going to happen.
That's what life's like. And you have to think, you have to think about... And that was the beauty of having that very detailed end of acute care plan, because we'd gone through it. We talked about it as a staff group. We talked about, she will not go to hospital and what you would do to prevent her going to hospital. And Victoria's team certainly knew she was dying. What we didn't know was when. So it was important to everybody that we actually said that she was dying, and not all these stupid euphemisms like passing going on and all that nonsense. And it was particularly important for people, young people. These were young people who'd never experienced death before, support workers. And initially they didn't want to know, the hand came up and the face turned. And then we gradually, and we had the support of a psychologist. The team had the support of a psychologist, and they were able to talk amongst themselves about death and dying with the support of a psychologist. But we talked about it a lot, and we particularly talked to Lisa about it, because she'd lived with Victoria for 24 years. We didn't know how much this woman understood, but it was very important to us that she knew that her flatmate was not going to be there. The other family carers found this very difficult, wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't talk to us about it, didn't want to talk to their daughter about it, but we felt we had to, with the support workers, to talk to Lisa and encourage her. She was in there having, the tea parties and the saying goodbye. So we looked at it straight in the eye and dealt with it. The fact that I turned all the lights off and was playing calming music, I couldn't play that music for a year, Irene. And I played it and then I looked at the tracks and it says, oh gosh, I can't. End of my suffering, and you're in my heart. So she died to you're in my heart. Oh. Wasn't that beautiful? And I just
you're all going to get the hankies out now.
I just didn't know, and I couldn't look at it for a year. And the music is so beautiful. And music was her language, you see. And I mean, what better way? And in fact, Caitlin, her team leader, said, if I want to go, that's how I would go, like Victoria, with fairy lights, with people who love me, and to beautiful music. So I always think, as well as she could, Victoria lived happily, but she actually died majestically, if that's... I've been struggling for a word, and it is majestically. And wouldn't you want to wish that for your nearest and dearest? All I can say is that when a death is good, then a lot of the pain goes. And Victoria had a very good death. And it helped us as a family. And I know it helped the support workers. Because they tell me now, the ones that are left, they've said to me, our life would never be the same again. Working with Victoria and seeing her through that time, we'll never be frightened of death again. And Victoria's left a huge legacies, and that's one of them.
Okay, thank you, Jean, for sharing those words. I've seen that a couple of times, and every time I watch it, I take away something different and learn something new. And I think today two things have stuck with me. The first one is a peaceful, dignified death for a much-loved woman. And the other thing that I think will stay with me, forever is people can pick up what is in your heart. And you spoke then about Victoria picking up on feelings. So yeah, thank you, Jean. It's now time for our Q&A, where we have Jean as well as Victoria's father Norman with us, and then we've got Kat with us too. But I'm going to hand over to Irene, who will chair the questions.
Thank you very much, well, Sarah, but particularly Jean. And gosh, as you say, Sarah, I haven't just watched this several times. I was there with you, Jean, telling me the story many times. And again, like you, every time I hear it, I learn something new. There have been a number of questions. And before we go to you, Jean, I just want to say hello, welcome to Kat Sullivan, who we haven't seen yet. So maybe I'll go to you first. So Kat, you're the Quality Improvement and Clinical Practice Lead at Hospice UK. But at the time of Victoria's death, you were at the palliative care team. So I just wonder whether you just want to, what your thoughts were and your comments on hearing again. It's 8 years ago now, no, more than that, 9 years ago. So maybe you want to say something about your experiences then and looking back on that time.
Yeah, thank you so much for thinking to invite me back. It's lovely to be here and to be remembering Victoria, years later in Dying Matters Week. It's so important. And I think I remember Victoria so often, and as I do many of my patients, or most of them, but there was something very special about Victoria. I think I had never really seen family love expressed the way that I did when I was taking care of Victoria, and in a respect as well, there was an extended family feeling in the place where Victoria was living. So she had these extraordinary young people take, and I say young because I'm a little bit older, but I mean, they weren't children, they were grown up, but they were these remarkable people, and they brought so much care and intelligence and sensitivity with everything that they did with Victoria, I think it's fair to say. And they really made sure that Victoria's care was a level up on care that I often see when people try to be cared for at home. That's probably the biggest thing.
Thank you for that. And I was struck, actually, I'm going to you now, Jean and Norman. Just, yeah, thank you again for sharing the story. Lovely to see you. There's been quite a lot of comments and questions in the Q&A box, but most of those comments, Jean, are in high praise of you and how wonderful and amazing you have been. and maybe start with some concern some people have. What support and who supported you? What support you had after Victoria died, and maybe even during that time, because that's quite important. I think you are quite extraordinary as a family member, but yeah, maybe you can say something about that.
During the time that she was dying, we're very short on family. We don't have any other. Well, we have family members, but we're not in touch with them. So it was mostly my extraordinarily good friends who supported me. And when you have a disabled child, if you're lucky enough, you can belong to different groups, and it was my different groups: Centre 404, family carers, and Kith and Kids, my family carers. It's people who know just what true tragedy and joys having a disabled member in your family brings. And I guess it was them, and I guess it was the family, the three of us, the Norman, Tara and myself, who just shared, and we've shared everything. So during that time.
Thank you. Let me then just ask you, because there's a couple of questions, and I think these are important ones. What struck me this time watching it, Jean, was you saying that Victoria knew what she wanted. Even though she was a woman without words, she knew what she wanted, but it was up to you, the people around her, to make sure everybody knew what she wanted. And so one of the questions was, were you able to ascertain exactly what it was that Victoria would want before she became terminally ill? Because I think that's a question. As far as I understand it, you had a sort of circle of support almost around her, but maybe you can say a little bit more about that group and the people who helped Victoria, and that included you, to share what it is that she wanted.
Yes, we deliberately set up the circles of support because we didn't want it dominated by mum and dad. We'd seen this happen in other families. So initially we approached young people her age, and asked them to become her friend, and then two women, and they come across her in the Kith and Kids Project, and they got to know her. And to get to know Victoria took some time. And then because she loved a man, we felt she should have a man or men on her circle of friends. And these people over the years, and it was, Madeline and Helen were with her for 15 years, were able to determine what they thought Victoria wanted. And when we brought them the news that her kidneys were failing and should we go down the dialysis route, it was them who challenged us and were strong enough to challenge us. I mean, I'm a difficult woman at times, so to challenge me is difficult. Norman's nodding, I can see he's nodding. But they were looking at it purely from Victoria's point of view, and they knew her and knew her well.
That's maybe the crux of it, isn't it? To have people who are really able to put themselves in Victoria's shoes and say, well, if she could speak, what is it that she would say? Now, what we said, because you clearly are I think you and Norman, you're both quite an exceptional family in understanding and knowing that you need other people apart from just yourself. And I know that you told me before, Jean, that the doctors and the social workers were reassured by your decisions, to knowing that it wasn't just you who'd made it, it wasn't just a family. What would you suggest if people don't have family? Because many people with a profound learning disability, well, with any learning disability, don't have family around.
Well, if they live in supported living or residential, then try and introduce other people. And it's, I've run schemes where you introduce other people to their lives. Perhaps an ex-member of staff might like to come back and be part of their life on a small scale, first of all, and gradually they sort of, as time goes on, they get used to the role. And if you think of it as what your life would be like without a friend in the world, That's what somebody with a learning disability would be. So my advice would be try and get some friendship going for those people. Yeah. And there's plenty of material now that you can look at, you know, circles of friends stuff. But try and introduce somebody else if they haven't got family.
Yeah, and maybe that is part of the sort of advanced forward planning, isn't it? Not just for the end of life, but for many major decisions in somebody's life, to make sure that there are people who can speak on, you know, on, and that needs thinking, doesn't it? It needs planning and really thinking who that could be for each person. Norman, did you want to say something there? I could see you.
Yes. I think this area was, for me, quite difficult, and I think it's one of the most difficult areas, is to be told by one of your daughter's friends that, no, you've got it wrong. Now, a lot of people can't handle that, and we've known families that have got so far and then completely drop the whole thing, and they spend the rest of their life looking after the disabled person. And you've got to be able to listen and to imagine. I don't know if I'm getting across, if I'm what I'm saying is clear, but it's very difficult, and yeah, it takes practice.
Yes, I do hear what you're saying there, Norman, and in fact, one of the questions I get most often mostly from staff and from learning disability staff and palliative care teams is, what can we do if the family and the care staff don't agree? You know, in fact, that was one of the questions that came up. What if the family really wants to keep the person at home, but the social care team, you know, says they don't want to they can't keep the person at home? And maybe I can bring you in here, Kat, because I'm struck that how, you know, when I saw Victoria's end of life care plan, I was struck at how detailed that was and how clearly that needed input from an expert like yourself, the palliative care team, to help the teams, the staff, the families really understand what might happen, what you would do if this, then that, you know. So I think having you as the palliative care team involved so early was probably really quite important. So I don't really say, do you want to say something about that?
It was detailed before we ever got there, before palliative care ever got there. It was a tremendous document that had been so carefully thought out. I think what I would say is, especially when you're talking about a broader team with different, lots of people were bringing different values to it, to the care of Victoria, to the home where Victoria was. And I guess the most important thing, because there were times, weren't there, Jean, where you had to say to me, she's not getting it quite right, this carer, or whatever. So I think that there was a lot of, from my memory, there was a lot of conversations around that, but it was also, and I think this was one of the great things about having a big document, it made it clear what roles people had, and it, for me as well, there was a lot of listening to different people. So listening was key. A little bit like what Norman said, we have to be able to listen.
Yeah, and I think, you know, often part of the reason why we wanted to do this new study on how to involve people with a learning disability in end of life care planning is because quite often people think, you know, you need an easy read end of life care plan. You know, you can sort of decide with somebody what to do, what they want, and then that's it. You know, that's decided. Whereas we're really struck by how much Victoria's end of life care plan was an evolving working document that kept changing, and that didn't necessarily need Victoria to speak in words, you know, to say what it was she wanted. The detail on that care plan was quite extraordinary. So, and quite often, as we heard from Jean, the staff that support people with a learning disability are often quite young. It's a shame Katrina, the team leader, can't be here today, but she did tell us last week how, looking back, how young they all were. In a way, she always said it was almost a helpful thing because they didn't really have a clue about what they might have to worry about. But they were young and inexperienced, and they really needed guidance to know what death and dying looks like, what might happen. So, that is really quite important. We seem to have lost Jean and Norman from the team, but yeah, Kat, just go over.
I was just going to say that I think one of the things that we need to learn about advanced care planning for everybody, and I think for me, one of the joys of taking care of Victoria was that she taught me about broader palliative care, even though I thought myself quite seasoned at that time. There's a real challenge for us with advanced care planning about understanding the value of giving specifics to people, and obviously the limitations of that as well. But if we don't give specifics, and there were lots of those specifics in the care plan, the advanced care plan that Victoria had, and I think that was really helpful. It was very technical in parts, but I think that would have helped any doctor going in so that it was more protective.
That's really interesting. And let me just tell you a little bit more about the Victoria and Stuart Project then, which is a study that is starting this month, and it's a 2-year study where we really want to think with families, with palliative care teams, with social care staff, with people with learning disabilities in particular, the different ways in which you can think about planning ahead for the end of life. And clearly Victoria's way was very different from Stuart's way, for example, whom we'll hear more about in a future webinar. Stuart was somebody who was able to talk and write and think about and plan in words very specifically. That's a very different approach. So we want to spend the next 2 years to really look at all the different ways in which we can do this and figure out what we think, what people with learning disabilities in particular think is the way that they would welcome and they would want. So you will hear more about the Victoria and Stuart Project over the next 2 years, and keep an eye on the websites and Twitter, because there will be ways in which you can all be involved in that and say what you think. I'm just going to go back to Sarah to see if she's got any final comments. As I say, for some reason Jean seems to have disappeared, but in her absence, we just want to really thank her and Norman for their huge generosity in sharing Victoria's life with us. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you, Irene. And also, as Irene said, thank you to Jean, to Norman and to Kat. There's so much more to discuss, but I hope that this has helped you, if you're watching, to think about your own practice. Also, importantly, a huge thank you to you. So those of you that have joined us today, joined in our discussions and asked questions, or indeed if you're watching a catch up on recording, thank you. Thank you to Anastasia and Becky, who have been either managing the technical side of this webinar behind the scenes or uploading it to our YouTube. Thank you to Kingston University for their support in hosting this webinar, and thank you to those of you that have given a donation to the PCPLD network. As a small charity, we have no other source of income, so any donations are hugely welcome, however small. So for more information on how to donate, please go to the website www.pcpld.org. Before I wrap up with final comments, I'm just going to hand over briefly back to Irene, because I can see she's wanting to say a final thing to you as well. Irene.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's just to say that we are keeping an eye on all your questions and comments, and there are more coming in now, including a question about whether Victoria's end-of-life care plan is available somewhere. As part of the Victoria and Stuart Project, we will, make some of these things available to you all, and we will, make sure that we share our learning as widely as possible. And just before we go off, miraculously, Jean and Norman has reappeared. So Jean, we've said a huge thank you to you all. We're about to finish, but I wonder whether you want to have the final word, you and Norman, and whether there's anything you want to say before we go off.
Yes, I just want to say, since Victoria died, lots of people with learning disabilities in the UK have heard about how she died, and they've said to people, when I go, I want to go like Victoria. And I think that's a wonderful legacy that she's left. And just make sure that you really listen to people like Victoria. That's all I want to say.
Thank you so much, everybody, and that is quite a legacy to leave. So we will be looking at Victoria's way and Stuart's way and all the other ways, but Victoria's way was clearly a wonderful way to go. Hugely thanks to you, Jean, I have to say, and the teams around, all the people around them. So thank you very much, and that is the end of our webinar. Thank you.